The last photograph. Sarah Mitchell stood in the doorway of her photography studio, watching the rain streak down the windows like tears she'd long since stopped crying. 3 years. 3 years since she'd built this place from nothing, since she'd transformed an abandoned warehouse in the arts district into something that mattered. And now, in one afternoon, she discovered it had all been built on lies. The email was still open on her laptop. She'd read it 17 times, each word burning itself deeper into her memory. It was from Marcus Webb, her business partner, her mentor, and until 6 months ago, the man she'd planned to marry. The email wasn't meant for her. It was a forward, sent accidentally by his assistant, containing a thread that went back 2 years. 2 years of carefully orchestrated theft. Her clients, her techniques, her contacts, all systematically cataloged and copied. Marcus had been building his own studio across town, using everything she'd created, everything she'd shared with him in those late nights when she'd trusted him with not just her business secrets, but her heart. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was learning that Diane Chen, her best friend since college, her bridesmaid who'd held her when the engagement fell apart, had been the one helping him. Every tear Sarah had cried on Diane's shoulder, every fear she'd confessed, every new idea she'd shared over wine and takeout, it had all been reported back. Diane and Marcus had been sleeping together for over a year before he'd ended things with Sarah. The breakup she thought was about his fear of commitment had actually been about his impatience. He wanted to leave sooner, but Diane had convinced him to wait, to take more, to make sure they had everything they needed before cutting Sarah out completely. Sarah closed her laptop and walked to the window. The city stretched out before her, its lights beginning to flicker on in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably in his new studio, the one set to open in 2 weeks with a launch party that had already made the local design blogs. Somewhere out there, Diane was probably at home, maybe texting Sarah something sweet and supportive, keeping up the performance. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Diane's last message, sent just that morning. Thinking of you, babe. Remember you're stronger than you know. Coffee this week? Sarah's finger hovered over the keyboard, then she set the phone down. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly what she was going to do. The thing about being a photographer is that you learn to see what others miss. You learn to wait for the perfect moment, to understand lighting and shadow, to know that the right composition can change everything. Sarah had spent her entire adult life learning patience, learning to observe, learning that the best shots came to those who knew how to watch and wait. She'd been watching for 6 months, ever since the breakup, feeling something off in Diane's suddenly increased attentiveness, noticing small things that didn't quite fit. The way Diane asked pointed questions about Sarah's upcoming projects. The way she'd encouraged Sarah to attend certain events while skipping others herself. The subscription to industry newsletters that Diane, who worked in pharmaceutical sales, had no business reading. Sarah had suspected. But suspicion and proof were different countries, and she'd only just received her passport. She made herself a cup of coffee and sat down at her desk. Outside, the rain had intensified, and she could hear it hammering against the metal roof of the studio. She opened a new document and began to type. The first thing Sarah did was call her lawyer. Daniel Hoffman had handled her business contracts from the beginning, and unlike almost everyone else in her life, he'd earned her trust through 5 years of consistency. She sent him the email thread and waited while he read it. His voice was tight when he called back. This is bad, Sarah. But there's something here. The non-compete clause in your partnership agreement with Marcus, he's definitely violated it. And if we can prove he used proprietary information, client lists, your techniques that you documented as trade secrets, we might have a case for more than just breach of contract. What are we talking about? Sarah asked. Significant damages. Possibly an injunction to stop his opening. But Sarah, this is going to be expensive and it's going to be public. Are you prepared for that? Sarah looked around her studio, at the photographs lining the walls. Her work. Her vision. Her 10-hour days and maxed-out credit cards and sleepless nights learning Photoshop and building a client base from zero. I'm prepared for whatever it takes, she said. Good. I'll start the paperwork. But Sarah, in the meantime, don't contact either of them. Don't let them know you know. The element of surprise is the only advantage we have right now. She hung up and sat in the silence of the studio. Don't contact them. That was going to be harder than Daniel knew, because Diane was persistent, and Sarah had always been too kind for her own good. Her phone buzzed. Diane. Hey, you've been quiet today. Everything okay? Sarah stared at the message. Her fingers wanted to type what she knew, to unleash everything she was feeling. Instead, she typed, just busy with a shoot. Talk soon. 3 dots appeared, pulsed, disappeared. Then, okay, love you. Sarah put the phone face down on the desk. The next morning, Sarah did something she never did. She called in sick, canceled her appointments, and caught a train to Providence, where Marcus's parents lived. She'd met them half a dozen times during the engagement, and his mother, Patricia, had been kind to her. Genuinely kind, or so Sarah had thought at the time. But Patricia Webb was also the person who'd fronted Marcus the money for his new studio. That detail had been in the email thread too. A $200,000 loan that Marcus promised to pay back after the launch made them profitable. Sarah arrived at the Webb's colonial-style home just before noon. Patricia answered the door in gardening gloves, surprise evident on her face. Sarah, what a lovely surprise. Is Marcus with you? No, Sarah said. Actually, I was hoping we could talk. Just the two of us. Patricia's expression shifted to concern, but she invited Sarah in. They sat in a sunroom overlooking a garden that was preparing for winter, the last roses clinging to their stems. Patricia, Sarah began, I need to know if Marcus told you why we broke up. The older woman's hands folded in her lap. He said you wanted different things. That the timing wasn't right. Did he tell you he was sleeping with my best friend? That he'd been planning to leave for months? That he was building a competing business while we were still together? Patricia's face went pale. Sarah, I don't know what to say. Did you know any of it when you gave him the money? Patricia stood and walked to the window, her back to Sarah. She was quiet for a long moment. I knew there was someone else. He told me that much. But he said you two had already ended things, that he'd met her after. He said the business was a fresh start, that he needed to step out of your shadow and build something of his own. He stole from me, Sarah said quietly. My client list, my processes, everything I shared with him as a partner. He's using it all. Patricia turned, and Sarah could see tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. If I had known, would never have helped him. You have to believe that. I do believe you, Sarah said, and she meant it. But I need you to know the truth. Because in 2 weeks, when this all becomes public, when the lawsuits start, I need you to understand who your son really is. Sarah left Providence that afternoon with something she hadn't expected. An ally. Patricia promised to talk to her husband, to review the loan terms, to consider what they might do with the information. Sarah didn't know if it would amount to anything, but she'd planted a seed, and sometimes that was enough. Back in the city, Sarah threw herself into work. She had 3 weddings that weekend, and she needed the distraction. But more than that, she needed the money. Legal fees were already piling up, and Daniel had warned her this could take months to resolve. On Sunday evening, as she was editing photos from the last wedding, her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Sarah Mitchell? This is Rebecca Torres. I'm a photographer, I work mostly in commercial. I don't know if you know who I am. I know your work, Sarah said, sitting up straighter. You shot that campaign for Riverside Development last year. It was beautiful. Thank you. Rebecca's voice was cautious. Look, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's been some talk in the community about Marcus Webb's new studio. About where his client list came from, how he managed to line up so much work before even opening. Sarah's heart began to race. What kind of talk? The skeptical kind. Marcus isn't well liked, Sarah. He has a reputation for being difficult, for taking credit for other people's work. When I heard he was opening a studio using what looked like your client base, I started asking questions. And I'm not the only one. Why are you telling me this? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Because 7 years ago, I worked with a photographer named James Chin. He taught me everything I know. And then his business partner stole from him, drove him out of the industry. I watched James lose everything because he was too proud to fight back, too worried about seeming petty. I don't want to see that happen to you. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you, she said. There's more. Rebecca's voice dropped. I have a friend at the Sentinel. She's been looking into Marcus for an unrelated story, something about unpaid vendors from his last project. But when I told her about your situation, she became very interested. If you're willing to talk to her, I think she'd want to hear your side. Sarah thought about Daniel's advice to stay quiet. But she also thought about James Chin, whoever he was, driven out of an industry he loved because he'd tried to take the high road. Give me her number, Sarah said. The article ran on a Thursday, 8 days before Marcus's launch party. Sarah hadn't expected it to be front page, but the Sentinel's editor had deemed it newsworthy enough. The headline read, "When success is built on someone else's foundation," and it was devastating. The reporter, Maya Patel, had done her homework. She'd interviewed former clients who'd been surprised to get outreach from Marcus's studio. She'd talked to industry professionals who confirmed Sarah's techniques and style in Marcus's portfolio. She'd even found 2 former employees of Marcus's who'd left rather than participate in what one called ethically questionable practices. Sarah's phone started ringing before she even finished reading the article. The first call was from Daniel, who was both impressed and slightly horrified. This is going to make things complicated, he said. But it also establishes a public record of wrongdoing. That could work in our favor. The second call was from a number she recognized. Marcus. She let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call. Another voicemail. Then a text. Sarah, what the hell did you do? We need to talk. Now. She blocked his number. An hour later, Diane called. Sarah stared at the screen, watching her best friend's name flash. Former best friend. She answered. Sarah, Diane's voice was shaking. I just saw the article. I can't believe you'd do this to Marcus. After everything he did for your career. Everything he did for my career? Sarah's voice was ice. Diane, I know. I know about you and Marcus. I know you've been feeding him information for over a year. I know about all of it. Silence. Sarah could hear Diane breathing, could almost see her mind working, trying to figure out what to say. Sarah, it's not what you think. Then what is it? Explain it to me. Explain how my best friend and my fiancé conspired to steal my business while I cried on your shoulder about how heartbroken I was. We didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. And Marcus wasn't happy with you, Sarah. You have to know that. You were always so focused on work, so intense about everything. He needed someone who could be present. So it's my fault? Sarah felt laughter bubbling up, bitter and sharp. I was building a business, Diane. The business he's now trying to steal. The business you helped him steal. I never stole anything. I just listened. If Marcus used what he heard, that's not on me. You know what the saddest part is? Sarah said. I would have forgiven almost anything. If you'd just been honest with me. If you'd told me you had feelings for him, if you'd said something before all of this. But you didn't. You kept up the act. You let me trust you while you were sabotaging everything I'd built. Sarah, please. Diane was crying now. You don't understand. I love him. I didn't want to hurt you, but I love him. Then I hope he's worth it, Sarah said, and ended the call. She sat in her studio as the afternoon light faded, feeling strangely empty. She'd imagined this confrontation so many times, had planned what she'd say, how she'd make Diane understand the magnitude of the betrayal. But now that it was done, she just felt tired. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Torres. Saw the article. Well done. If you need anything, I'm here. Sarah smiled for the first time that day and typed back, thank you. That means more than you know. The next week was chaos. Marcus's launch party was cancelled. 2 of his major clients pulled out, citing concerns about the publicity. Patricia Webb called Sarah to tell her that she and her husband were freezing Marcus's loan pending an investigation into how their money was being used. Daniel filed an emergency injunction that temporarily prevented Marcus from operating under his new studio name or soliciting any of Sarah's former clients. But the real damage was to Marcus's reputation. The photography community, Sarah discovered, was smaller and more interconnected than she'd realized. The article had sparked conversations about ethics, about what happened when ambition crossed into theft. Marcus's name became shorthand for a cautionary tale. Sarah should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. She'd spent 3 years building a life with Marcus, believing in a future that had never been real. She'd shared her dreams with Diane over a decade of friendship. And now both of those relationships were just wreckage, scattered across her life like debris after a storm. She was editing photos late one night when someone knocked on the studio door. She almost didn't answer. It was past 10, and she wasn't expecting anyone. But something made her get up, made her walk to the door and peer through the glass. It was a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a leather jacket against the October chill. Sarah opened the door a crack. Can I help you? The woman smiled apologetically. I'm sorry to show up so late. My name is Alex Reeves. I'm a photojournalist. I just got back from 6 months in South America, and I've been catching up on local news. I read Maya Patel's article about what happened to you. Okay, Sarah said cautiously. I had something similar happen to me 3 years ago. Different industry, but the same betrayal. Business partner, romantic relationship, the whole thing. And I handled it badly. I got angry, burned bridges, said things I regretted. I let it poison me for a long time. I'm sorry, Sarah said. But why are you telling me this? Because I wanted to tell you that how you're handling this, going through the proper channels, being strategic instead of just reactive, it's the right way. And I wanted to warn you that even when you win, and I think you will win, it's going to hurt for a while. The betrayal doesn't stop stinging just because you get justice. Sarah found herself opening the door wider. Do you want to come in? I was about to make coffee. Alex smiled. I'd like that. They talked until almost midnight. Alex told her story, about a documentary film she'd been working on with her girlfriend, about how the girlfriend had sold the footage to a major network and taken sole credit. About the year of litigation that followed, the settlement that came too late, the career that had to be rebuilt from scratch. Did you ever forgive her? Sarah asked. No, Alex said simply. And I don't think I will. But I forgave myself, and that was harder. I forgave myself for not seeing it coming, for trusting someone who didn't deserve it, for all the time I lost being angry instead of moving forward. Sarah looked at her coffee cup. I don't know how to do that yet. You will. Alex stood to leave. And when you do, when you're ready to move on, remember that there are people who respect what you've built. People who want to work with photographers who have integrity. Your reputation isn't damaged by this, Sarah. If anything, it's stronger. After Alex left, Sarah sat in the quiet of her studio. She thought about everything she'd lost. Marcus, Diane, the easy trust she'd once had in people. But she also thought about what she'd gained. Daniel's loyalty, Patricia's unexpected support, Rebecca's friendship, Alex's wisdom. She thought about the clients who'd reached out after the article, telling her they'd always preferred her work anyway, asking to book sessions. The betrayal had broken something in her, but maybe that breaking had made room for something new. Something stronger. 2 months later, the settlement came through. Marcus agreed to pay damages, to cease using any materials or methods he'd acquired through their partnership, and to publicly acknowledge Sarah's role in developing the techniques he'd claimed as his own. His studio never opened. The debt to his parents, combined with the legal fees and the damaged reputation, made it impossible. Last Sarah heard, he'd left the city entirely, moved to somewhere out west where nobody knew his name. Diane tried to reach out once, a long email full of apologies and justifications. Sarah read it once and then archived it without responding. Some betrayals didn't deserve the energy of anger. They just deserved to be left in the past where they belonged. Sarah's studio thrived. She hired an assistant, then another. She started teaching workshops on photography and business ethics. She spoke at industry conferences about protecting your intellectual property and recognizing the warning signs of toxic partnerships. And 6 months after the settlement, when Rebecca Torres called to ask if Sarah wanted to collaborate on a major commercial project, Sarah said yes without hesitation. They worked well together, their styles complementing each other in unexpected ways. The project led to another, and another. One evening, after a particularly successful shoot, Rebecca suggested they grab dinner. They ended up at a small Italian place in the North End, talking about everything and nothing. As the night wore on, Sarah realized she was laughing, really laughing, in a way she hadn't in years. "You know what the best revenge is?" Rebecca said, pouring them both more wine. "It's not making them suffer. It's building something so good, so successful, that their betrayal becomes just a footnote in your story instead of the whole story." Sarah raised her glass. "To footnotes then. To footnotes." As Sarah walked home that night, the city lights reflecting off the harbor, she thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Heartbroken, betrayed, furious. That woman had wanted to destroy Marcus and Diane, to make them hurt the way they'd hurt her. But somewhere along the way, that desire had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like freedom. The freedom to stop carrying their weight, to stop giving them space in her head and her heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alex Reeves. "Saw your latest work on Instagram. Absolutely stunning. Coffee soon?" Sarah smiled and typed back. "Definitely." Revenge, Sarah had learned, wasn't about destruction. It was about refusing to let someone else's betrayal define your story. It was about building something so bright and beautiful that their darkness couldn't touch it. It was about transforming pain into purpose, and anger into art. She'd gotten her revenge not by tearing them down, but by rising so far above them that they became irrelevant. And standing here, looking out at the city that had witnessed both her devastation and her resurrection, Sarah realized something important. She'd won. Not because Marcus had lost his studio or because Diane had lost her credibility. She'd won because she'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and used it as the foundation for something better. She'd let the betrayal burn away everything that was weak in her, and what remained was stronger than steel. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened her calendar. Tomorrow she had 3 client meetings, a consultation for a documentary project, and dinner with Rebecca. Next week she was flying to Chicago for a conference where she'd be giving the keynote speech. Next month she was starting a mentorship program for young photographers. Her life was full. Not full of revenge or bitterness or anger. Full of work she loved, people she trusted, and a future she'd built with her own hands. She took one last look at the harbor, the water dark and mysterious under the night sky, and then she turned toward home. Behind her, the past grew smaller with every step. Ahead of her, the future waited, vast and full of possibility. And Sarah Mitchell, photographer, survivor, Phoenix, walked toward it with her head held high. As Sarah walked home that night, the city lights reflecting off the harbor, she thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. Heartbroken, betrayed, furious. That woman had wanted to destroy Marcus and Diane, to make them hurt the way they'd hurt her. But somewhere along the way, that desire had transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like freedom. The freedom to stop carrying their weight, to stop giving them space in her head and her heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alex Reeves. Saw your latest work on Instagram. Absolutely stunning. Coffee soon? Sarah smiled and typed back. Definitely. Revenge, Sarah had learned, wasn't about destruction. It was about refusing to let someone else's betrayal define your story. It was about building something so bright and beautiful that their darkness couldn't touch it. It was about transforming pain into purpose, and anger into art. She'd gotten her revenge not by tearing them down, but by rising so far above them that they became irrelevant. And standing here, looking out at the city that had witnessed both her devastation and her resurrection, Sarah realized something important. She'd won. Not because Marcus had lost his studio or because Diane had lost her credibility. She'd won because she'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and used it as the foundation for something better. She'd let the betrayal burn away everything that was weak in her, and what remained was stronger than steel. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened her calendar. Tomorrow she had 3 client meetings, a consultation for a documentary project, and dinner with Rebecca. Next week she was flying to Chicago for a conference where she'd be giving the keynote speech. Next month she was starting a mentorship program for young photographers. Her life was full. Not full of revenge or bitterness or anger. Full of work she loved, people she trusted, and a future she'd built with her own hands. She took one last look at the harbor, the water dark and mysterious under the night sky, and then she turned toward home. Behind her, the past grew smaller with every step. Ahead of her, the future waited, vast and full of possibility. And Sarah Mitchell, photographer, survivor, Phoenix, walked toward it with her head held high.